you everyone for joining today. Today we'll be talking about DevOps and a quality-driven mindset. Before we get started, just share a little bit about myself. So I actually lead our quality engineering practice at Experis. I'm based out of Columbus, Ohio. I've been to Boise quite a bit of times. We have a very strong Boise team there locally. So, if you guys haven't had the chance to meet us or interact with us, I highly encourage you to reach out, especially if anything from this topic relates, right? And you see that we could help you. Certainly welcome your reach out. A little bit about myself, being based out of Ohio, I went to school at Miami University, got my degree in computer engineering. And then right after college, I served in the United States Army as a military intelligence officer. So before I ever touched any type of software, I actually had the opportunity to work with some really awesome hardware, as you can see on the screen. This is the Gray Eagle. This is actually an unmanned aircraft system or a drone. And so my time in the Army, I actually got to train a lot of soldiers in flying these, both being deployed and also domestically. So if you're not aware, tomorrow is Veterans Day. So if you get anything out of this conversation, I just ask, please reach out to a veteran that you know. I can tell you from experience, small acts of kindness can go a really far way, and I know they'd appreciate it. After the Army, I actually started my career at Nationwide Insurance here in Columbus, Ohio. That's where I built my first large automation test program, and then actually was introduced to Experis at that time. So I jumped on board with Experis, helped out another local client in Huntington National Bank, and helped establish their test automation program as well. And then that's when I was pulled up into the solutions and services practice that I sit today. And over the past 10 years, I've had a lot of great exposure and experience working with a lot of great clients. Seen a lot of the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? So being 11 years in the industry now, really have had the opportunity to help a lot of clients with their automation needs. Mainly focusing on testing, but you'll see in today's topic, there's a whole bunch of overlap when we start talking about ideals such as DevOps and how we're able to actually achieve practices that DevOps calls for. One of the major pillars is really making sure that we have the right automation practices, right? But also that all of our quality practices are automated so we can have that continuous flow from the developer actually writing code to actually, going out to production with our clients and customers. So really, with everything, I'd like to start with the issue, right? And today, a lot of organizations, a lot of our clients are actually trying to go through Agile and DevOps transformation, right? A reason that they're trying to do so is really try to speed up the development and delivery of our products to our customers and clients, right? And so oftentimes when we start talking about speeding up process or getting quicker or getting faster, one of the things that really starts to take a hit is quality, right? We've all talked about cutting corners, right? And trying to be as efficient as possible, but also at the same time, try to be effective, right? So that's what this whole conversation is going to be about, is one, what is DevOps? How can we achieve some of the practices that DevOps calls for, but how can we do so while still keeping quality at the forefront of what we do, right? Because what's the point of sending something out quickly that's effective, that doesn't work, that gives our customers a bad experience, right? So really the whole idea today is to talk about the quality process overlaid that DevOps process, right? And how we coordinate that end to end. Today we'll talk about strategies, we'll talk about tools, and we'll talk about best practices that make all this happen, right? But again, the whole idea is, being as quick and effective as possible while maintaining some of the quality expectations that are customers expect. So as I said before, a lot of our clients are going through transformations, right? So I want to spend a little bit of time of what is DevOps and why are we talking about, continuous quality, continuous testing, and the importance in that process, right? And so, again, going back to my experience and helping a lot of our clients and customers, I mean, I'm out there reading a bunch of, industry reports. Everyone's talking about AI. ML, right? How do we go faster? Data ops, data analytics, all those types of things, right? But I'll be honest, a lot of our clients are still struggling just with the idea of agile, right? And adopting those practices, getting real good at establishing self-sufficient cross-functional teams, requirements, development, test, even, maybe some release management capabilities within the team as well, right? And so really, that's the basic stepping stone that we need to focus on, right? Those agile practices, making sure that we have that core team that can take an idea from business, right, and develop it and actually have it ready to go out to the customers, right? And so each one of these steps is actually a step of maturity, right? So when we talk about continuous integration, it's the whole idea of integrating newly developed code with the main body of code that's to be released, right? And so we've helped a lot of our clients and customers, again, with this idea of continuous integration, continuous delivery, CI/CD, using tools like Jenkins or Bamboo or the many CI server tools that are out there, right? But again, each one of these steps of maturity calls for certain practices, right? Calls for a certain level of understanding and competency in order to succeed, right? And today what we'll be talking about is really my idea of DevOps and the idea of continuous deployment, right? And the continuous deployment is all about actually writing the code, integrating with the main branch, introducing automated processes as far as the release process, as well as automated testing, to where a developer could actually write a new functionality, a new code, a new feature, commit that code, and then the pipeline takes over. That automated pipeline takes over to where it could go all the way to production without any human intervention. Now, I know that seems far-fetched or kind of like that theoretical idea of what we want to achieve, but we've actually helped clients achieve this mature state. But I also will refrain and tell you guys also a lot of the strategies and pipelines that I show you today actually still call for some human intervention, just simply because that helps with the risk tolerability of our clients. It helps with making sure that we're still able to put human eyes on the products that are about to be released to our customers, just to have that final valid check, right? And so I don't want to have you guys go away from here saying that Josh said, in order to have continuous deployment, it's got to be all automatic and it's got to be beginning to finish with no human intervention, because that's simply not the case. I would actually argue that human intervention is still very much important in this process, especially when we're talking about some of the products that we're releasing to our clients. There's just that UI aesthetic piece that we want to take care of. And, I'll tell you from firsthand experience, it's hard to automate everything, right? And sometimes it just doesn't make sense. So I'll show you what that real life pipeline is today, what that looks like, and kind of show you how you can build those human intervention checks and still have a mature practice like continuous deployment. So what is continuous quality? Continuous quality is a core capability in Agile and DevOps, where all testing activities run continuously in an integrated fashion with development and delivery. Immediate bug fixing is enabled, test environments are provisioned instantly, and unit functional and non-functional tests are run in an automated way, orchestrated by continuous integration and continuous delivery tools, right? And so the whole idea, as I said before, is bringing in those continuous integration tools like Jenkins, Bamboo, Travis, all those different tools I don't think that really matters. I will show you kind of a tool strategy that we've deployed with one of our clients that use that Atlassian suite of tools. So their respective CI tool is Bamboo. But the whole idea is to orchestrate all those activities together and build that automated pipeline, right? So, dev has its own piece, test has its own piece. When we're talking about testing, I brought up the idea of functional and non-functional. So I'll actually show you a test strategy that was deployed with this particular client. Obviously, the functional is covered between UI, API, data, as well as unit testing, but also the non-functional, which I'm talking about security and performance, right? And how we can integrate and orchestrate all this from end to end in a DevOps pipeline where we're providing those real-time assessments to all the stakeholders of our products or our project, right? And so what I mean by that is as our code migrates through the respective environments, and again, I'll show you kind of the environment strategy for this particular client as well, where, it may have started in dev, moved to test, then beta, and then out to production, right? But throughout that process, as code's being migrated, as code's being checked and tested and functionalities being verified, we're getting real-time assessment. So at any point, if it's not meeting our expectations, we have an objective go, no-go quality gate where it shuts it down, sends out appropriate correspondence via email or whatever type of reporting function we've built into the pipeline, and it'll actually inform the appropriate team or persons to address that issue as quickly as possible. So again, we can start the process again. But the whole idea is to have a very stable and trustworthy test set and automated pipeline that we can actually move this code through. And remember, if we're passing all these quality checks, we can actually send that new code, that new functionality, or that new feature out to production for our customers to consume, right? And the whole idea is, we want to do this in a very strategic manner, where we're continuously measuring, continuously providing feedback that can be shared and used to refine the process, right? So at any point, if we're running into errors on, say, the performance of our test environment, and we're always not hitting that threshold, or we're always failing at that part of the pipeline, actually using that feedback and making the proper adjustments and making the proper moves that we need to make in order to refine that process and enhance that performance for that environment, right? Or make it more production-like, right? A lot of the Achilles heels that I'm sure everyone's experiencing, right? Around environment strategy, test data, all the things that all of us are trying to solve, it just gets amplified or magnified when we try to move to a process like DevOps or continuous deployment, right? Where we have to make sure that we're always looking at where we can get better, how we can do better, and really brings out the idea of continuous improvement. So let's look at a few key points to continuous quality. And I want to make sure everyone's clear and understands that the topic or the idea that I'm sharing today, the primary goal is assessing business risk coverage, right? So oftentimes as a quality engineering practice leader for Experis, I'm going in and helping clients solve their quality issues, right? And most of those are, hey, I don't know if I have the right test coverage, or hey, we're running manual tests and it's taking too long to do so. Can we have some automated tests, right? And then once we actually start moving to automated testing, we actually get into some more complex issues as far as how do we know what we're testing is the right thing to be tested, and how do we know that we have a viable product that is ready to be shipped to the product, right? And so the whole idea of continuous quality is to be able to assess that business risk. And I'll share some of those practices of how we're able to do so. But the whole idea is to really define those business critical workflows that are most important to our customers. And so as we're building new code or new functions and new features, We know for a fact all those business critical workflows are working. And then also adding those extra tests around that specific feature or functionality that we're delivering, always making sure that we're providing business an idea that, hey, testing's complete, but not only complete, here's kind of that risk assessment, everything's clear, we're good to go, let's go ahead and ship it to our customers, right? And really what that does is establish a safety net that helps the team protect the user. And what I mean by that is we all want to get the product market quicker, but when you fail to implement comprehensive QA, you risk wasting that rapid release on a product that ultimately fails on functionality. So the whole idea, right, is having that safety net or having those guards, or back to that previous slide, those go, no-go quality gates. As we ship new code, we're putting it through the ringer, right? And we're making sure we're testing everything that we need to test. And that provides that safety net, and it really builds the trust with the business that we have everything covered from a functional standpoint, right? But also have everything covered from, we've covered all our bases, we've done all the risk assessment that we need to do, and we've provided enough feedback and even data insights, right, to showcase to them, hey, we're ready to go, we're ready to be deployed. And remember, as I'm going through these, some of the client environments I'm talking about, they're deploying on 2 or 3 times per day frequency, right? So this isn't a slow process, but it's really building up our practices and building up this pipeline that is automatic and automated. But we've done our due diligence to make sure that we have all that coverage and that safety net built in to where we've built that trust, right? And so, it's not really a question every time we're pushing new code out to our customer base. But over time, we've established that trust and confidence with the respective stakeholders. Another key attribute to continuous quality is an always-on stable test environment. So I highlighted this in the previous slide as one of the main Achilles heels to development, right? Even to testing today, regardless if you're doing DevOps and continuous deployment. But making sure that we have an always-on stable test environment means that we always have an environment that we can do these tests in, that we can assure these quality go or no-go gates are available, right? And oftentimes that means that we have to have a great data plan or data strategy across all the environments. It means that we've had to invest enough money or effort in creating environments that are production-like, right? So as we're running these quality go, no-go gates, we have that assurance that, this is operating just as it would in production. So if it's passing in these stable, always on test environments, then we know once we go out to production, we're not going to get any surprises, right? And oftentimes, I will tell you, this is one of the gaps that many of our clients have. And we have our own dedicated practice of kind of, establishing that environment strategy for them, beefing up, their presence in the cloud, things like that. You'll see in the pipeline, this particular client that I'll showcase was using mainly AWS, but they also had containerized environments with Docker. And so it wasn't necessarily always on, but as part of the pipeline, once we were running something through, it would spin up the environment, run all the tests, do all the quality gates, and then if everything passed, spin it back down. So again, driving some cost efficiencies in that regard, because you're not always paying for having that environment even when you're not using it. So it's another strategy that you could focus on as well. A fourth main point is it's seamlessly integrated into the software delivery pipeline and DevOps toolchain. So as I said before, essentially we're overlaying the whole idea of DevOps, which is that automated pipeline. But again, now we have to add that additional automation around test, around quality, and make it all work seamlessly, right? Seamlessly integrate it. Again, having multiple jobs within Jenkins or whatever CI server tool that we are, one passes, kicks off the next one, right? If that one passes, kicks off the next one. And so it's just really a great strategy of coordination and integration, making sure everything's working seamlessly, and making sure that we're getting that feedback that we talked about before. And then lastly, it delivers actionable feedback appropriate for each stage of the delivery pipeline. So again, as I go through the strategy in the pipeline, which you'll see is very detailed and step by step, I'm not going to hit it too hard today, but you'll see each stage has kind of its different policy as far as what we're testing, what we're verifying, at what levels, at what depth, right? So we don't have to do the same thing, environment to environment to environment, but each one has its own quality policy or strategy, and it's providing, additional feedback or appropriate feedback for that stage, making sure that we're getting all the inputs that we need in order to make the appropriate decision to go ahead and push the code out to our customer. So what does continuous quality look like? This is the testing strategy for the client environment that we're showcasing today. And you can see kind of their environment strategy, which I think I alluded to earlier, with a dev environment, a test environment, a beta environment, and then the production environment, right? And so within each one of these environments, I've actually showcased or highlighted certain activities or some of those quality checks that we're doing at each stage, right? And then once we leave kind of this slide, we'll actually jump into the pipeline and we'll see what it looks like, with tools and, the step-by-step verifications, things like that. But one thing I want to highlight, just as I started with, is you can notice not all these are automated, right? So again, just because we're doing continuous deployment and doing DevOps doesn't mean that we don't have manual intervention, right? And in this case, we do, and for good reason, right? So in the test environment, you can see exploratory testing or UI ad hoc testing involved there. Again, not everything can be automated, and even if it can, I would argue that sometimes it's not the best idea. And what I mean by that is there's some very complex tests out there, and I'll actually bring up the testing pyramid later on, where a lot of our clients, a lot of our customers are actually spending way too much effort in the UI space. I'm talking thousands, 2,000, 3,000 tests, right? Which I'll highlight later is just not very cost effective, right? Something that could take 15, 20 minutes with our eye test, exploratory testing, using our domain experts at the best possible points of the pipeline, right? To quickly run through the application, run some edge cases, do some extreme testing, right? That we've already slated as part of the project. Goes a lot better, a lot faster, and is a lot more cost effective than actually trying to automate those tests. Right. And then another thing I want to highlight in this strategy is you can see there's a lot of repeats as far as the types of tests we're running, but I will highlight later kind of that depth and breadth that I've talked about, where the end-to-end test that I'm executing in the test environment may or may not be the same end-to-end test that I'm running in the beta environment. As you can see, that's one of the two that are similar in both, right? And same with performance, same with security. And you can kind of see a lot of what goes into a testing strategy, right? We've talked about the functional and non-functional aspects of testing, but really just everything that goes in, the different types of tests, performance, security, UI, regression, end-to-end, exploratory testing. So if you don't have a good sense of what your testing strategy is today, I highly encourage you to reach out. Happy to help kind of define that strategy, because I think that's one of again, one of the biggest gaps that we see in a lot of our client environments is they don't have a good sense of what their go-to-market strategy is when it comes to quality and testing. And when you don't have that, it's hard to understand, what to automate. It's hard to understand how we're going to generate benefit and value within DevOps and in this pipeline that we're talking about, right? And so, I really encourage everyone to kind of take a look at this strategy, see if there's any missing pieces in yours today, and we'd be happy to help kind of fill those gaps for you. So now let's jump into the real pipeline, right? So I'll kind of get you oriented. I know there's a lot of logos and noise on this slide. The next 4 or 5 slides are similar to this one, but I'm actually walking you from, you can see here, a developer writing code, right? And actually committing it to that main branch that we talked about. But before we get there, kind of give you a sense of the tool environment, right? And so, as I said before, the client uses the Atlassian suite of tools. So they were using Jira for like their project planning. That's where they had their storyboards, right, for the different respective projects. They utilized the X-Ray plugin for test management, which there's tons of benefit doing so. They could actually link tests to the original user story, providing that traceability. When building test plans within the X-Ray, we can actually highlight which tests are automated and which ones are manual, right? And when we execute the automated test, it actually feeds back into X-Ray. So as a business stakeholder, as a stakeholder of a project, right? If, say, you saw my test plan of 100 tests for this particular feature that we're about to push to production, when it executes the automation, if we have 90 of those 100 tests automated, it would actually feed back the results of that, that execution back into the test plan. And so when we do get into that human intervention time period of a pipeline, the testers know exactly what they need to execute in those 10 tests. Once they execute those and give it a pass, that is that 100% verification that we were talking about that moves the pipeline to that next stage, right? So you can see kind of bringing tools in like X-Ray can really help drive a lot of the practices and benefits that we're talking about here in DevOps and continuous quality. Another one that I want to highlight is Bamboo, right? So that is the Atlassian CI server tool. So again, this tool is what's doing a lot of the coordination that we've been talking about, all the way from the continuous integration of code, all the way to the different jobs of, you know, unit tests, functional tests, just that coordination that we've talked about throughout the presentation. Some other tools you can see probably from the logos, this particular client was mainly a Java-based application, right? So using Maven. Again, a lot of their application was in the cloud, and I brought up earlier the Docker, right, of containerized environment and spinning those up as we go, really achieving that idea of always on stable environments, using it as we go, and then spinning it down as we're not using it, right? And then they were using Git, I think, within Bitbucket, right? And then they integrated that with Crucible for a lot of their code reviews. And so everything I just covered, you know, on this slide, and then there's some testing tools they're listed below as far as some of the things they're using, such as Sonar Cube for static code analysis, JUnit for the unit testing, DB-Unit for their data unit testing, Mockito for some of their stubbing, Apache JMeter performance, Coverity, security scans, right? And then what I want to really pull out, right, is all this is happening at the dev local level, right? So oftentimes, again, another gap that we see in a lot of our client environments is, you know, the developers develop and then they push it, and then it's up to the test team to do a lot of their testing, right? But you'll realize one of the main practices I call out is, you know, it's a whole team collaborative approach, quality, and having these practices and tools set up and the strategies that we talked about in the previous slide, really having those fully vetted and available to the developers so they can do a lot of these checks before they're actually even checking into the master, but more so before they even kick off that automated pipeline, right? So you can see there's quite a bit of checks that are happening before we actually even kick off that promotion of code across those respective environments that we talked about earlier. So here on the next slide, moving along, development creates a pull request to merge this new feature with the dev branch. And so when the pull request is approved and merged, there will be a new build initiated by Bamboo, and the automatic pipeline will kick off by spinning up and deploying to the dev environment. Now, once we're in the dev environment, you can see a lot of the quality activities that are happening again, sanity, smoke tests, some quick hit tests to make sure, all right, the code was deployed, it's in the environment. Let's just make sure, hey, we can go to the URL, make sure we can log in, simple tests like that. But then also now we start getting into some more complex tests around performance, security, unit tests. I'm going to highlight is another major gap in a lot of our client environments. And I'll highlight this in the test pyramid as well. Remember, we're trying to get away from those thousands of UI tests and really try to cover most of our functionality and most of our test coverage from a unit test perspective, because they are cheaper to create, cheaper to execute, and they're very, very fast, right? So we get that instant feedback. And so if we commit some new code, it goes to the dev environment, we run thousands of unit tests against it, we don't hit the quality thresholds that we're looking for, the whole thing stops right now. And that's the whole idea of a go, no-go gate, right? It stops right now, and we have that feedback needed to go back to the developer to be able to fix those things, not deploying a lot of the more resources that we've created throughout the pipeline, but able to quickly fix it now and then restart this process, right? Once we go from here, if no issues are detected in the dev environment, then the pipeline continues automatically spinning up and deploying to the test environment, again, using AWS and the Docker containers, and where we're able to increase the depth and breadth of our testing scope. So once again, smoke tests are executed to ensure there was a successful deployment to the test environment. Then the integration and API tests are executed. The UI tests are executed and the regression tests are executed. And then we focus on more of those non-functional security and performance as well, right? So within here, I've listed a lot of tool logos, right? You notice here, Cucumber Selenium was the test automation framework that this particular client was using. And best practices and future slides, I'll really highlight the idea of like behavior-driven development or acceptance test-driven development, which again is just a test practice that really builds into this whole idea that we're talking about. And that's having tests being generated in parallel with the code that's being generated, right? And so we're getting away from that idea of assembly line where the developers are writing code, it goes down, it starts to get tested, right? Usually in a manual manner. And then as it goes down, we have an automation team come in and actually automate, those business critical workflows that we're talking about. Then it goes to production. Although I've seen that work, again, it's not the most effective or the most efficient way to do so, right? But kind of take that same scenario where a dev's writing new code as our testing team is writing new tests, and that could be both automated and manual. Again, we're not trying to achieve 100%, right? But in parallel, so when the dev's done, we actually have the test that functionality. And outside of that, we always still have that regression test suite that we're always executing on every build and deploy, right? And so you can see we're really cutting out a whole step where everything's happening in parallel, and we can really get that new code out to production in a quicker, faster manner, which again is our primary goal in all of this. All right, where are we at? Deploy to prod. So once again, a series of automatic quality checks are initiated to the beta environment using a different policy of test. Again, this all goes back to that strategy we talked about, really defining what these different test sets are, the different levels of tests that we want to do, all those kind of things. And then you'll notice here on the last part of the slide, deploying to prod, with the release candidate in production, we run a few quality checks to ensure a successful deployment. And so this would be very minimal. Oftentimes, a lot of our clients are limited as far as what they can actually test in production. But again, this would be the same of kind of like a sanity check. And if it is capable, running some of that new functionality that we just deployed to make sure that it's out there and that we can see it and it's running. But now that we're at the end of the delivery pipeline, there should be tools in place that track application performance and availability in production, monitoring both real and synthetic user journeys to ensure continuous feedback. So in this particular case, this client was using App Dynamics Splunk, and I'll highlight some of the importance of these tools, but it's really to close the feedback loop back to our teams. And again, the high idea of continuous improvement on the pipeline, right? Of actually seeing how our customers are using the new features, the new functionality that we just deployed, getting that real life data analytics back into the team, addressing issues. If we're seeing something that we didn't experience throughout our pipeline, making sure that we build that additional coverage, or address some of the issues that we're seeing in production back into the pipeline. So again, if I'm not saying this is going to eliminate all the production issues that we might see, but the idea is when we have a production issue, taking that feedback, closing the loop, right? Covering it back in our environments, our pipeline, right? And so never experiencing the same error twice, right? And so that's the whole idea of having those tools. And it really adds secondary dimensions and analytics to understand the optimal combinations that reflect what customers are using in production. For example, we might combine analytics about the most popular browsers with analytics about the most used features to get a better understanding of the highest risk, highest impact areas of the product, and use the secondary dimensions available in analytics tools to determine how much testing you need to do and where in order to gain the confidence and coverage levels we need, right? So again, that whole idea of continuous improvement, expanding that coverage, again, building that trust within business and then within our pipeline, right? That, hey, when we write new code, you give us an idea, we write new code, we can actually run it through this ringer and with a good sense of confidence, send it out to production with very little human interaction. So how do we get continuous quality into our DevOps pipelines? Let's take a look at the key differentiators that separate DevOps leaders from DevOps laggards, right? So I've highlighted a lot of these throughout our conversation, but I'm really going to drill into some of them and really pull out some of the most important ones, right? And the first one is follow 4 core continuous quality practices. So I'll cover this here in the subsequent slides of what those 4 best practices are. And that's against, what we talked about, which is rely on manual testing, right? So how do we make all this testing and all this quality interwoven into our DevOps process, and how do we coordinate it end to end and make it automated? That's what we'll cover here in the next couple of slides. Another big difference is DevOps leaders are twice as likely to consider automating the software quality process a critical business differentiator. That's in comparison to what I said before, which is a lot of the gaps that we see in our client environments, and that is that testing is a bottleneck, right? So oftentimes, starting back to the original problem statement, hey, Josh, I want to go faster. I need to go quicker. I want to increase the frequencies of our deployments, all common goals that we hear today in industry, right? But as they start down that agile or DevOps transformation, one of the biggest points is testing the bottleneck, right? We're relying on manual practices too much. We haven't automated. We haven't created one of those strategies that you just showed 4 or 5 slides ago, right? And so, it really is a practice in itself to make sure that we have all the pieces together on that assembly line that work and that can be connected and coordinated in order for an idea like DevOps or continuous deployment to happen. Another one that our DevOps leaders do is they focus on contextual metrics. And so what I mean by that, rather than counting metrics is oftentimes when we get a report, it'd be, hey, I executed 1,000 tests, 995 passed, 5 failed. That doesn't mean anything to me. Probably doesn't mean anything to you. And so the whole idea is really to start to get in contextual metrics where maybe we can tell a better story with those counting metrics. Out of the 1,000 tests that we executed, we do have 80–90% coverage on our requirements, right? Of the 5 that failed, it's a low risk area of the application. So, didn't hit our threshold of stopping the pipeline. So that tells a lot better story than just kind of those counting metrics, but actually gives us the insight or the data analytics to be able to make a proper business decision of yes, we have that safety net that we talked about, we have the proper coverages, and we know what that risk tolerance is, right? So yes, we can move on. And so you can see later on, I really drill into data and data analytics and how important it is to really drive a process like the one that we're talking about today. And lastly, they measure the user experience across an end-to-end transaction. So again, back to those production tools such as Splunk and AppDynamics, we're actually measuring the user experience all the way across the application and end-to-end transaction. And we're realizing where our faults are, where those defects or where those issues lie. And that could be performance, functional, any of the likes, right? And really be able to enhance our pipeline respectively using that feedback rather than measuring application specific or team specific metrics, which again has nothing to do with the actual product and how our customers are using it, but more so how we've defined the problem and how we've defined the solution, right? And so there's no better feedback than how our users are using it in production. So as promised, those 4 core continuous quality practices that we've talked about. The first one is make a cultural commitment to collaboration and quality. As I said before, it's not just the quality engineering team or the test engineering team that should be responsible for quality. When we're talking about DevOps, remember we have a cross-functional team, self-sufficient. The whole idea is that we can write code and deploy code all the way to production in a given time frame, right? And so it really starts to make sure everyone has a sense of accountability, right? And is contributing to the quality expectations of our company. And so when we jump into this, as I said before, we really start to talk about the idea of the test pyramid, right? And if you're not familiar with it, I'll show you quickly kind of this visual metaphor of the test strategies that we've already covered. But the idea at the top is the exploratory testing up there, which is those manual tests that are still very important and viable and continuous deployment type of pipelines, right? Then you have the automated UI test. Again, we're not trying to do thousands, but more so hundreds. And that would be like those business critical workflows end to end. Just as I would use the banking app, that's, if it's a banking application, that's what our UI test would be. And then further down, automated API tests, automated integration tests, automated component tests. And then the bottom layer, which should be the majority of your tests, is automated unit tests. I cannot tell you enough, this is probably the biggest gap that we see in our client environments, that they bring me in as a quality engineering practice leader to fix a lot of their quality issues. And one of the first questions I ask is, are you guys doing unit testing? And I always hear no or minimal, right? Automated unit tests are the most effective way to prevent defects. When we start talking about some of these tests on the higher layers of this pyramid, that's the practice of finding defects or detecting defects, right? Although they're viable and saves us from sending out bad code or bad features to our clients, we really want to try to find these defects as early as possible. And the best way to do that is unit testing. Again, you saw it, in that pipeline. developers can actually exercise those tests before they actually initiate the pipeline, when they're just merging the code into the main branch. And so we get to find out, have we met that quality threshold that our team's expecting, the company's expecting, before we actually start utilizing a lot of these resources, right? A lot of our clients are inverting this pyramid where the majority of their tests are UI. The problem with that is, again, it's a lot more costly to develop those types of tests. It's a lot more costly to execute those tests, and it takes a lot longer to do so, right? So those clients that are actually exercising 1,000 or 2,000 tests, even when they're doing parallel execution, are taking that full 8 hours of night to run all those tests. So tons of CPU resource, tons of resources, even if you're spinning them up just when you're exercising them, just to get the same verification that we could if we pushed a lot of those tests at the lower levels, which are faster to execute and a lot less costly to generate. Another major practice of continuous quality is applying a broad range of tests anchored by automation. So hopefully you saw that as we walk through the pipeline, right? And even in that test strategy, all the different types that we can have. But when we're focused more on the functional automation, right? I would say that 80% is a threshold that you need to achieve in order to hit some of these practices that we've talked about. Continuous deployment, right? You saw that there was human intervention within that pipeline, but when you start getting lower than 80%, now we're spending long periods of time of manual tests. Again, in that example of 100 tests in my test plan, if I have 90 automated, I have 10 tests to run through. I could still do those 10 tests with my team, within a 15, 20, 30-minute window and get that quality go that I'm looking for. But if we get lower than that, especially with some of the features or functionalities that we're putting out there, it could now turn into days, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, but 80% is usually the target that we try to drive for our clients. And how we're able to do that is not focus so much on those UI tests that we're talking about, but more so on API tests. And then again, that's not listed here is the unit testing, right? So really enhancing those dev practices of writing unit tests. I could argue for a really long time that, those companies that are running thousands of UI tests, I could knock out 900 of those running unit tests and have the same coverage that they have today. And so we've actually helped customers kind of invert that pyramid back. Another important way to do this is adopting a strategy like behavior-driven development, acceptance test-driven development. Remember, not having automation as an afterthought, but actually part of the software development lifecycle. So when we're actually doing like our sprint plannings, right, and looking at the user stories that we are committing to run for this 2-week sprint, 1-week sprint, or even in 1-day Kanban, right? That when we look at the work that we're about to develop and deliver, we know what that automation workload looks like as well as manual, right? So if my team commits to 10 user stories for this particular sprint, I know out of those 10, I am able to achieve 80% automation and 20% manual. I know what my automated tests are. My test engineers are actually developing those tests in parallel with the developers writing the code. And then my manual QA are actually writing that 10% or 20% manual test. So those are ready when the code's delivered and we can actually execute against the pipeline. The whole idea is that we're trying to reduce risk, lower costs, and increase execution. So same goals that we're trying to achieve when we're talking about DevOps and continuous deployment. Ooh, 255, here we go. Third practice, leverage cloud for breadth and scalability. So the third, just setting up and maintaining the infrastructure, physical or virtual, necessary to test across the ever-expanding universe of browsers, operating systems, and mobile platforms is both costly and complex. So coming from quality engineering, doing it my whole career, right? 11 years now. I would tell you, with automation, testing gets more complex. And as technology continues to grow, testing is getting more and more complex. And the resources that we need to pull together in order to satisfy some of the coverage expectations that our companies have, we really need to utilize cloud-based testing platforms. We've actually helped customers build these internally, but I will tell you it's very timely and costly. But most of the time it's necessary for these clients. I'm talking about like telecom, ones that are exercising on devices that aren't yet available to public. But if you're not one of those types of organizations, highly recommend cloud-based testing platforms. I've listed a few that I've used in my experience: Selenium Grid, Browser Stack, Sauce Labs, Perfecto, Amazon Device Farm, right? And what this allows us to do is focus on the test, right, as part of our software development lifecycle, and then actually just sending that test across to one of these cloud-based testing platforms, and now exercise it against any device that we want to, any operating system, or any browser, and oftentimes in parallel execution, right? So where my team writes one test, it could actually turn into an execution of 100 tests when you start to combine the different device and OS combinations, as well as running that 4 different times against Safari, Edge, Chrome, Firefox, whatever those requirements are. So you can see how quickly our testing coverage is an exponential path, right? So let's focus our team on just writing the test of coverage, right? And then just sending that off so we can get that exponential coverage that we're looking for, making sure, again, that we're covering all our bases. And again, building that safety net, that confidence, right? We've covered everything, so there's nothing you need to worry about this. And then lastly, develop a strategic approach to analytics. So developers should actively look to integrate a layer of analytics within the testing process such that insights can be applied across the product team. Smartly layered analytics can shed light on a number of functional issues, including which browsers and mobile platforms are most often experiencing failure and whether an application's test results are consistent. Beyond just functional testing, teams also can leverage analytics to assess user experience and performance, examining, for example, how the user experience is impacted by heavier traffic loads and how overall application performance is impacted by new updates to the code. Having this added layer of analytic insight enables developers to better understand the entire quality picture and deliver improvements that can be applied both in real time and future tests. So within this slide, actually have a heat map, right? And so this would be a test plan, visual test plan of our coverage of a particular application. And so the larger the square, the more tests we have. The different colors signify the risk, right? So you'll see here US login being red, 6 tests run, 3 failed. So this would actually be a threshold that stops the build, stops the deploy, and sends the proper feedback back to the respective team in order to fix that quickly and effectively, right? Each one of these squares, each one of these features, each one of these application areas could have different thresholds. So obviously login is extremely important in most applications, right? Whereas there could be other features that are nice to have, but not necessarily part of that business critical workflow. But the whole idea, right, is to make sure that we have actionable real-time test metrics that are feeding that pipeline, giving us those continuous measurements, and measuring the user experience across an end-to-end transaction that allows us to, again, prove or disprove that, hey, we have created new code, we've delivered new code, and now it's ready for production. So I covered a lot. It's 3 o'clock right on the dot. Woo, that's perfect. I thank you again for everyone's time. I thank you for the opportunity. Hopefully you guys found this valuable. If there's anything in here that kind of hit home for you, please feel free to reach out to me. Again, we have a very strong team there in Boise, so just reach out to them as well. They'll get contact with me. But regardless, we're here to help. We've helped a lot of people with their enterprise applications, their software development, their testing, DevOps journeys, right? So we just want to be that partner for you. So again, thank you for your time and have a great day.